She gave a stranger her last bit of kindness. He gave her his last bit of faith in humanity. Neither of them knew that a $5 bill refused on a rainy Thursday night would destroy a family, rebuild an empire, and prove that sometimes the poorest person in the room is actually the richest. This story will break your heart and put it back together. I'm not exaggerating. Watch till the end. Let me tell you about a night that changed everything. A night when a crumpled $5 bill became worth more than $1 billion. It was late on a Thursday evening in Chicago, and the rain was coming down so hard you could barely see across the street. Inside Rosie's Diner on Lincoln Avenue, the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered like they'd been doing for the past 20 years. The place smelled like coffee, grease, and hard work. That's where we meet Sarah Mitchell. She was 32 years old, a single mother, and she'd been on her feet for 16 hours straight. This was her second shift of the day, and every muscle in her body was screaming for rest. But Sarah couldn't rest. Not yet. Her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, needed new asthma medication. The landlord was threatening eviction if she was late on rent again. And tomorrow was going to be another long day. Sarah was wiping down the counter when the door opened, letting in a blast of cold, wet air. The man who walked in looked like he'd been living on the streets for months. His coat was torn and dirty. His hands were shaking from the cold. He smelled like rain and desperation. He shuffled to a booth in the back corner and sat down, hunched over like he was trying to disappear. The manager, Tony, noticed him right away. He marched over, arms crossed. "Hey, buddy, this isn't a shelter. You gonna order something or what?" The old man's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Just coffee, please." Tony shook his head. "Cash up front." The old man reached into his pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out a few coins, maybe $1 and change. Tony laughed, not kindly. "That's not going to cut it. You need to leave." And that's when Sarah did something she couldn't really afford to do. She walked over, placed her hand gently on Tony's arm, and said, "I've got this one, Tony. It's on me." Tony gave her a look that said she was crazy, but he walked away. Sarah turned to the old man and smiled, the kind of smile that costs nothing but means everything. "How about some soup, too? And some bread? You look cold." The old man looked up at her, and for just a second, Sarah saw something in his eyes. Not just gratitude. Something deeper. Something sad and searching. He nodded slowly. 20 minutes later, Sarah brought him a steaming bowl of chicken soup, fresh bread, and hot coffee. She even led him to a seat near the heater in the back. "Take your time," she said softly. "Nobody's rushing you." As she walked away to help other customers, she didn't think about what she'd just done. She didn't pat herself on the back or expect anything in return. That wasn't who Sarah was. She'd grown up with nothing, raised by a grandmother who taught her one simple rule: treat people the way you want to be treated if you were in their shoes. When the old man finished eating, he stood up slowly, like his bones hurt. He walked to the counter where Sarah was counting her tips for the night, $43.50, barely enough, and he placed something on the counter, a $5 bill. It was wrinkled and worn, but to Sarah, it might as well have been $100. $5 meant bus fare for 3 days. It meant a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread. It meant a little bit of breathing room. But when she looked at the old man, saw the dignity in his eyes, the quiet pride in his posture, she knew she couldn't take it. Some things mattered more than money. Sarah picked up the $5 bill and gently pressed it back into his palm. Her voice was soft but firm. "I can't take this, sir. In my world, guests don't pay for kindness." The old man stared at her. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then something happened that Sarah didn't expect. His eyes filled with tears. He nodded once, whispered, "Thank you," and walked back out into the rain. Sarah watched him go, wondering if he had somewhere warm to sleep that night. Then she went back to work, refilling coffee cups, clearing tables, counting down the minutes until she could go home and kiss her daughter goodnight. She had no idea that the man she just helped was actually William Patterson, one of the richest men in America. She didn't know that he owned half the skyscrapers in downtown Chicago. She didn't know that he was dying of cancer and had only months to live. And she definitely didn't know that he'd been wandering the city in disguise, searching for something he'd lost a long time ago. Proof that good people still existed. William Patterson had everything except the one thing that mattered. His own children, Victoria and Daniel, had shown their true colors the moment he told them about his diagnosis. They didn't ask how he felt. They didn't offer comfort. They asked about the will, about control, about money. That night, standing in the rain outside Rosie's diner, William made a decision that would shake his empire to its core. The $5 bill Sarah had refused to take was still warm in his hand. And in that moment, he knew exactly who deserved everything he'd built. Not the people who shared his blood, but the woman who shared her heart with a stranger, expecting nothing in return. The story was just beginning, and neither Sarah Mitchell nor the Patterson family had any idea how much that simple act of kindness was about to change all of their lives forever. Let me tell you what happened in the weeks that followed, because this story gets deeper and it gets harder, and it shows us something important about who we really are when nobody's watching. William Patterson didn't go home that night and immediately change his will. No, he was smarter than that. He'd built an empire by being careful, by testing things, by making sure. So he kept going. He kept dressing in those same torn clothes, kept wandering the streets, kept showing up at places where his money had built the walls, but his face meant nothing without it. And what he found broke his heart. He walked into the Grand Hotel on Michigan Avenue, a hotel his company owned. The doorman physically pushed him away. "Get out of here before I call the cops," the man said, not even looking at his face. William said nothing. He just turned and walked away. He tried a high-end restaurant in River North, the kind of place where he'd hosted dozens of business dinners. The hostess looked at him like he was garbage. "We don't serve your kind here," she said, her voice cold as ice. Security escorted him out through the back entrance. Over and over, the pattern repeated. In every polished, expensive place, he was treated like trash, not because of who he was, but because of what he looked like. It was brutal. It was consistent. And it confirmed everything he'd feared about the world his money had built. But then there was Sarah. She kept showing up in his mind like a lighthouse in a storm. She had less than anyone he'd encountered. She was struggling to survive, working herself to exhaustion, barely keeping her head above water. And yet she gave without hesitation, without calculation, without expecting anything in return. That's when William knew. He called his lawyer, a man named Robert Harding who'd worked with him for 30 years. They met at midnight in William's penthouse office, the city glittering below them like scattered diamonds. "Robert," William said, his voice steady despite the cough that kept interrupting his words, "I want to change my will, all of it." Robert set down his briefcase slowly. "William, I need you to think carefully about this. Your children—" "My children," William interrupted, "stopped being my children the moment I got sick. They became accountants, investors, strangers in expensive suits waiting for me to die so they can fight over the pieces." He pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. Inside was everything Robert needed to know about Sarah Mitchell, her address, her job, her daughter, her struggles. "This woman," William said, pointing at Sarah's information, "showed me more humanity in 5 minutes than my own children have shown me in 5 years. I want everything to go to her. The company, the properties, the investments, everything." Robert's face went pale. "William, they'll fight this. Victoria and Daniel will tear this apart in court. They'll say you weren't in your right mind. They'll destroy this woman's life, trying to break the will." "I know," William said quietly. "That's why she won't know. Not yet. The trust will be sealed. The beneficiary will remain unnamed until after I'm gone. Let Victoria and Daniel think they've won. Let them show the world exactly who they are." Over the next few weeks, William watched his children carefully. He watched as Victoria started making plans for restructuring the company. He watched as Daniel began talking to board members about new leadership. He watched as they both hired lawyers, quietly, thinking he wouldn't notice. One evening, Victoria came to visit. She brought flowers and wore a concerned expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Dad, people are worried about you. The board thinks you might need some help making decisions. Maybe it's time to step back, let us handle things." William saw through it immediately. This wasn't concern. This was a takeover disguised as care. "I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions," he said calmly. Victoria's mask slipped just a little. "Are you?" Because wandering around the city dressed like a homeless person doesn't exactly inspire confidence. "Maybe," William replied. "I learned more about people in those streets than I ever learned in a boardroom." She left angry. Daniel was next, more direct, more aggressive. "Whatever you're planning," he said, standing in the doorway of William's study, "whatever point you're trying to make, you need to stop. You're embarrassing the family. You're embarrassing the company." "The company will be fine," William said. "The question is, will you?" As his health declined and the pressure increased, William never wavered. He thought about Sarah constantly. He had people discreetly check on her, making sure she was okay, making sure she didn't know she was being watched. He learned that she'd taken on a third part-time job to afford her daughter's medication. He learned that she'd been evicted and was now living in a small room above the diner. Tony had felt bad and offered her. He learned that despite everything, she still helped people, still smiled, still gave what little she had. That's when William knew, beyond any doubt, that he'd made the right choice. One night, as he sat alone in his penthouse, looking out at the city lights, William wrote a letter. He sealed it in an envelope with instructions that it should be given to Sarah after his death. In it, he explained everything. Why he'd tested the world, what he'd found, and why she, of all people, deserved what he was leaving behind. "You gave me back my faith in humanity," he wrote in shaky handwriting. "Now I'm giving you the chance to restore it in others." 3 weeks later, William Patterson died peacefully in his sleep, and the storm that had been building finally broke. The day they read William Patterson's will, the sky over Chicago was gray and heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath. Victoria and Daniel Patterson sat in their father's private library, surrounded by shelves of books neither of them had ever read. They weren't dressed in black for mourning. They were dressed for business. This was a formality, nothing more. The reading of the will, the official transfer of power. They'd already started making calls, planning changes, preparing to take control. Robert Harding, the family lawyer, sat across from them with a folder that felt heavier than it should. He'd known this moment was coming. He'd prepared for it. But that didn't make it any easier. "Let's get this over with," Daniel said, checking his watch. "I have a meeting at 3. Robert opened the folder and began to read. The first part was standard. Acknowledgments, small items, formalities. Victoria received her mother's jewelry. Daniel received his grandfather's watch. They barely paid attention, waiting for the real part, the part about the empire. Then Robert's voice changed, became more formal. "To my daughter Victoria, I leave my collection of first edition books, in the hope that she might finally read one. I leave no company shares, no property holdings, and no liquid assets." Victoria's head snapped up. "What?" "To my son, Daniel," Robert continued, "I leave my college diploma, in the hope it reminds him that some things can't be bought. I leave no company shares, no property holdings, and no liquid assets." Daniel stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "This is insane." He was sick. His mind was gone. This won't hold up in court. Robert looked at them both with something that might have been pity. The remainder of William Patterson's estate, including all company holdings, properties, investments, and assets valued at approximately $3.2 billion, is hereby bequeathed in its entirety to, he paused, Sarah Mitchell of Chicago, Illinois. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Victoria screamed, "A waitress? He left everything to a waitress? Who is she?" Daniel demanded, his face turning red. "What did she do to him? This is fraud. This is manipulation. We'll fight this." "You can try," Robert said calmly. "Your father anticipated that. The will is ironclad. I have medical evaluations from 3 independent psychiatrists confirming his mental competency. I have video documentation of his decision-making process. And I have a letter explaining his reasoning, which I am not authorized to share with you." Victoria's hands were shaking. "This is because of that stupid homeless act, isn't it?" He was trying to prove some kind of point. He was trying to find humanity, Robert said quietly. And apparently, he didn't find it at home. While Victoria and Daniel raged and threatened and called their own lawyers, Sarah Mitchell was at Rosie's diner, completely unaware that her entire world was about to change. When the black car pulled up outside and Robert Harding walked in wearing his expensive suit, Sarah's first thought was that she was in trouble. Maybe the diner was being shut down. Maybe there was some mistake with her taxes. "Ms. Mitchell," Robert said gently, "my name is Robert Harding. I represent the estate of William Patterson. Could we speak privately?" Sarah's hands were shaking as they sat in a booth. Robert explained everything slowly, carefully, watching her face change from confusion to disbelief to something close to panic. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I just gave him soup. That's all. Just soup and bread." "You gave him more than that," Robert said. "You gave him dignity. And apparently, that meant more to him than anything his own children ever gave him." He slid the envelope across the table. William's letter. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it and read his words. Tears streamed down her face as she really understood, what had happened that rainy night. The media found out within hours. The story exploded. Rich billionaire leaves everything to poor waitress. Victoria and Daniel went on television, calling it a scam. Lawyers swarmed. Reporters camped outside the diner. Sarah's face was on every news channel in America. But Sarah Mitchell didn't run. She didn't hide. She stood in front of those cameras with her daughter, Lily, holding her hand, and she told the truth. "I didn't know who he was," she said simply. "I just saw a man who needed help. That's all, and I'd do it again." The court battles lasted months, but William had been thorough. Every challenge failed. Every attempt to break the will crumbled. Sarah Mitchell, a waitress from the south side of Chicago, became one of the richest women in America. And here's the beautiful part. The part that proves William Patterson chose correctly. Sarah didn't become what people expected. She didn't buy mansions or yachts or private jets. She paid off her debts, bought a modest house where Lily could have her own room, and then she got to work. She turned 3 of William's empty office buildings into affordable housing for families like hers, families struggling to survive. She funded medical clinics in poor neighborhoods. She created scholarship programs. She paid off medical debt for thousands of people who'd never know her name. And every Tuesday night, without fail, Sarah and Lily sat in their small kitchen, eating soup and bread, remembering where they came from and why kindness matters. William Patterson had built an empire with money and power. Sarah Mitchell rebuilt it with heart and humanity. So here's what I want you to remember from this story. You never know who's watching when you choose to be kind. You never know how far a simple act of decency might travel. Character isn't revealed when everything's going right. It's revealed when you have every reason to look away, and you choose to see people anyway. Sarah Mitchell gave a $5 act of kindness and received $1 billion legacy. But the real miracle wasn't the money. It was a reminder that in a world that often feels cold and cruel, goodness still matters. Humanity still wins. And sometimes, just sometimes, kindness gets the last word. What would you have done in Sarah's place? Would you have given back that $5? Think about it. Because tomorrow, you might be the one who gets to choose.